I have written an article for New Eastern Outlook. It is titled Buried in Steel, Military Production and NATO's Proxy War in Ukraine. And as I usually do, I will read through the article for people who don't have the time to read through it themselves. I will also add, and in this case, a lot of extra information about the topic at hand. And I will get right down to reading the article. Now in its third year, Russia's special military operation, precipitated by the overthrow of neighboring Ukraine's elected government and the subsequent militarization of the country by the US and the rest of NATO, is admittedly benefiting from Russia's immense military industrial base. This is something that now all across the Western media, we are seeing headlines vindicating all of the analysis that myself and many others have been doing over the past 2+ years about how Russia was outproducing the collective West, how claims of Russian military inferiority were overstated, if not entirely backwards. It is Western weapon systems, as I will discuss here, that have turned out to be less than effective. The collective Western media, once replete with stories of shoddy, antiquated Russian weapons being flattened by game-changing NATO weapons, now features headlines about the growing gap between Russian military production and NATO's inability to catch up. Other headlines now admit that previously vaunted NATO weapons have shortcomings exposed over the course of the last 2 years plus of fighting. And there's one in particular about the M1 Abrams American main battle tank that I will get to here in just a moment. Let's talk first about Russian artillery shell and also glide bomb production. And we're going to take a look at where it is now and how the Western media and Ukrainian media perceived it when the glide bomb first debuted in Ukraine on the battlefield. Among these headlines is Sky News's late May 2024 article, Russia is producing artillery shells around 3 times faster than Ukraine's Western allies and for about a quarter of the cost. That is this article right here. And you see they have a video featuring the NLAW, Western anti-tank weapon. They'll talk about that as well. It says, the research on artillery rounds by Bain and Company, which drew on publicly available information, found that Russian factories were forecast to manufacture or refurbish about 4.5 million artillery shells this year, compared with a combined production of about 1.3 million rounds across European nations and the US. And here's where I will add some additional information. I will read much more of this article to you than I included in my own article. So Sky News also says, on cost, it said the average production cost per 155 millimeter shell, the type produced by NATO countries, was about $4,000 per unit, though it varied significantly between countries. This is compared with a reported Russian production cost of around $1,000 per 152 millimeter shell that the Russian armed forces use. Artillery is only one of many munition shortfalls faced by Ukraine. That's when they start talking about anti-tank weapons. And I've talked about many other weapons as well. In this case, they're talking about the NLAW. And we all remember when the NLAW was first transferred over to Ukraine. Again, another game changer, one that we don't hear about except when they talk about they've run out of them. It says the importance of producing weapons and ammunition is why many experts say factory production lines, rather than the front line, could be where the war in Ukraine is won. Now, Sky News is saying that the West is manufacturing around 1.4 million rounds per year, but is that even true? What are the projected production rates of the US and Europe combined this year, next year, and into the future? What are those production rate goals? So we have this article from Politico. EU doles out 500 million euros for artillery ammunition and missiles as it seeks to match Russia. The bloc should be making 2 million artillery shells by year 2026. This was March 2024, so not even that long ago. Even if the US matched that combined, they would be making less artillery shells in 2 years' time than Russia is currently making right now. So you can already see the problem. There's another article here about American artillery shell production from Voice of America. It's something that I've talked about many times before. Even their goals 1 year, 2 years, even 5 years from now still fall short of what Russia is making right now. That is the main point. So let's get back to my article for New Eastern Outlook. Let's continue reading that. Artillery is among the most decisive factors deciding the fighting in Ukraine. According to US government and Western corporate-funded Council on Foreign Relations, another one of these think tanks, this was in an April 2024 brief titled Weapons of War, the Race Between Russia and Ukraine. That is this one here. It's by Max Boot, who I have to point out is a less than reliable source. He had been predicting American victory in its proxy war against Syria for many, many years. He was obviously way off the mark. So we have to take anything he says with a healthy dose of skepticism and look into it, double check it ourselves. But at least in this case, he says, artillery has been known as the king of battle for centuries, and this largely remains true today. In the Russia-Ukraine war, artillery fire accounts for 80% of the casualties on both sides. That makes it all the more ominous that in recent months, following the US aid cutoff, actually long before the cutoff, again, Ukraine went from being outgunned 5-1 in artillery fire to 10-1. So if Ukraine is outgunned between 5-1 to 10-1, then its casualties should also be somewhere between pretty close to 5-1 or 10-1 more than Russia. So when the collective West talks about Russian casualties being close to 500,000, what are they saying then about Ukrainian casualties if this is the ratio they themselves are admitting? So anyway, I say that in the article. If Ukraine is outgunned anywhere between 5-1 to 10-1, this means its casualties will likewise reflect this disparity. According to various Western sources, including the British Ministry of Defense, that would be from this article right here, Russia likely suffered at least 355,000 casualties in Ukraine war. Again, if that's true, and Ukraine is suffering 5 to 10 times more, what does that say about Ukrainian casualties? That means Ukraine has suffered approximately 5 to 10 times more, or somewhere between 1.7 million to 3.5 million Ukrainian casualties. More realistically, Russian losses are more likely around 50,000 versus 500,000 Ukrainian losses. And the Russian Ministry of Defense actually cites a lower number of Ukrainian casualties. Another growing area of concern for NATO and its Ukrainian proxies is Russia's use of precision-guided glide bombs dropped by Russian warplanes outside the range of what remains of Ukrainian air defenses, able to target and dismantle Ukrainian fortifications on a scale that even Russia's immense artillery advantage is incapable of, because these glide bombs are simply much larger, more powerful than even a dozen artillery shells hitting the same area over and over again. They're just capable of much more destruction. So we're going to go and look at this article right here from the BBC, Russia's glide bombs devastating Ukraine cities on the cheap, May 19th, 2024. The article says Russia is increasingly using glide bombs, cheap but highly destructive ordnance, to advance its offensive in Ukraine. More than 200 of them are thought to have been used in just a week to pound Ukraine's northern town of Volchansk during Russia's current cross-border advance near Kharkov. President Vladimir Zelensky said 3,000 such bombs were dropped on the country in March alone. What does that equate to? That equates to about 100 bombs a day. They're talking about just Volchansk. You have to remember, Russia's dropping glide bombs elsewhere along the line of contact on those same days. While Ukraine has received the US equivalent, the Joint Direct Attack Munition, JDAM, with its dwindling number of warplanes coupled with superior Russian electronic warfare capabilities, this capability has been rendered irrelevant. The London-based Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, that is here, jamming JDAM, the threat to US munitions from Russian electronic warfare. This was back in June 2023. It would extensively explain the shortcomings of US munitions and the unlikelihood of the US solving the technical challenges of proofing US glide bombs against Russian jamming anytime in the near future. Even if the US were able to overcome Russian electronic warfare capabilities, the number of US and European-made glide bombs would always remain a fraction of those used by Russia due to the lack of warplanes and trained pilots able to deliver them. So even if the US and Europe combined had more glide bombs than Russia did, there's not enough Ukrainian warplanes and pilots to deliver them at the same rate that Russia can. So let me add a little bit more context here. There's a couple of things I want to add that I just couldn't fit into the article. First of all, again, this 3,000 glide bombs in a single month, that's about 100 glide bombs all along the line of contact every single day. That is a lot of glide bombs. The BBC article says the mass use of glide bombs by Russia is relatively recent development, one that has proven devastating for Ukrainian forces in recent months. Glide bombs are built by adding fold-out wings and satellite navigation to old Soviet bombs. They are cheap but destructive. They try to make it sound like Russia is making these improvised weapons and this is why they're so cheap, and this is why they're having the impact that they are on the line of contact. But in reality, the JDAM also uses existing bombs, unguided bombs, that are simply given this wing kit and the satellite guidance system. That is what the JDAM is. So there's always this tendency to depict everything that Russia is using as shoddy, improvised, poorly constructed. Actually, let's get into a little bit of that here with this Defense Express article. This is a Ukrainian website, and it says this was May last year, about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago. Spending dozens of glide bombs a day, Russians struggle to deal with critical problems of their creation. The first thing you should notice about this headline is that almost every single word is capitalized except Russians right here. This kind of gives us some insight into the puerile mindset of the people running this publication and working for it. And if you look through the article, you will see them comparing pictures of the Russian glide bomb with the American JDAM and even Iranian glide bombs, and they're complaining about how ugly it looks, as if that makes any difference at all. And this goes back to this point I've made many times about the superficial superiority of the West. They have very slick looking weapons, but are they actually better? Does it matter how they look versus how they actually perform and how many of them you have on hand in the first place? I think this conflict in Ukraine is giving us a decisive answer. The BBC article also says a recent report by the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, said that they were decisive in February's capture of the once heavily fortified key eastern town of Avdiivka. Russian forces are now using glide bombs to attack the northern city of Kharkov. Ukraine has so far struggled to counter them. And so you remember in previous updates, there have been attempts by the West to blame the delay in US aid for the fall of Avdiivka, but in reality, it was inevitable. It didn't matter how much aid Ukraine was getting, unless it significantly exceeded the amount of aid that it has been getting all along. It was always going to fail. It was heavily defended, and Russia using artillery alone, this is the reason why they struggled so long to take Avdiivka in the first place. But ramping up the production and use of glide bombs changed that tactically and strategically. Now they're able to clear out even the most heavily fortified Ukrainian positions. There's nothing Ukraine can do to stop it, and that is what the BBC starts talking about next. And this is good to get into the details of, and this was not possible in my article. So let's just read some more of what the BBC said about this. Russia is able to stockpile glide bombs in high quantities because they are quite easily produced. The explosive part is essentially a conventional free-fall iron bomb, of which Russia has hundreds of thousands in storage from the Soviet period, says Professor Justin Bronk, air power and military technology specialist at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. They are fitted with pop-out wings, which, after the bomb is dropped, will flick out to allow it to glide much longer distances. Their attached satellite guidance system allows targeting of stationary position with relatively high accuracy. According to Professor Bronk, the mechanism of the bombs gives the Russians much of the functionality of a multi-million-dollar missile, but for a fraction of the cost. He says the glide kits, which are mass-produced and pretty mechanically simple, are added to Soviet bombs, of which Russia has a plentiful supply, meaning the cost per weapon can be somewhere in the region of 20,000 to 30,000 US dollars. That is extremely cheap. And right here, they're talking about how they are guided. And I remember many Western analysts and commentators claiming that, no, these glide bombs were not guided, which makes no sense. What is the point of dropping a bomb that glides that long unguided? There's no point to do that. How would you hit any target that you were aiming for by doing that? Dropping a bomb straight down is already somewhat difficult, which is why there's guided munitions to begin with. It's not that hard to create a guided glide bomb. It really isn't. But it's this type of denial, not wanting to believe Russia is capable of creating weapon systems that are effective and numerous. This is the deep level of denial that has driven the West so deeply into this unwinnable proxy war. The BBC continues. It says the destruction that the glide bombs creates is extraordinary. The ordnance thought to be most commonly used for glide bombs is the Fab 1500, which weighs 1.5 tons. For comparison, a Russian 152 millimeter shell contains about 6.5 kilograms of explosive material. Even the smallest glide bomb, the Fab 500, contains more than 200 kilograms of explosives. So again, the destructive power of these glide bombs is much greater than the artillery shells Russia is using. They turn even well-fortified Ukrainian positions into vulnerable targets. Because glide bombs create a greater explosive power, they are more likely to cause cave-ins or fatalities even in quite well-fortified positions, Professor Bronk explains. The powerful blasts also have severe effects on the human body. Glide bombs are making Ukraine's defensive strategy more difficult because the Russians can just continually bombard fixed positions until they're gone, Professor Bronk says, which is absolutely true. This is part of Russia's incremental, systematic, attritional approach to the conflict in Ukraine. This is why they have been successful. This is how they've ground down Ukrainian forces and defensive positions while preserving their manpower and equipment. That is the whole purpose of this. This is a war of attrition. You make more of everything. You're building a greater force while grinding down your opponent faster than they can replace their losses, both in terms of manpower and materiel. Now let's get back to jamming the JDAM, that RUSI article about these US JDAMs transferred over to Ukraine and how they're being jammed by Russian electronic warfare capabilities. It says a UAF spokesperson praised the bomb's accuracy. So they're talking about the JDAM when it first arrived. Praised the bomb's accuracy and urged the US to supply more. JDAM was in the news again 1 month later, just 1 month later. But this time for less auspicious reasons. A trove of classified US Department of Defense documents revealed concerns over the efficacy of Russian electronic warfare jamming of JDAM and other US supplied weapons using GPS. We've talked about this many times. HIMARS, the ground launched small diameter bomb, the Excalibur, GPS guided 155 millimeter artillery shell. We talked about all of this over and over again. So RUSI continues. It explains the documents articulated US concerns that Russian jamming was causing some JDAM ER extended range munitions to miss their targets. It's no secret that Russian land forces have developed scores of EW systems into the Ukrainian theater of operation. Some of these are specifically designed to jam GPS transmissions. The Russian Army's R-330ZH Zytel system, deployed at the tactical level, being a notable example. It detects and attacks radio signals across wave bands from 100 megahertz to 2 gigahertz. Open sources say the system can transmit jamming signals with 10 kilowatts of power. Signals from the US GPS satellites, which JDAM kits use, are transmitted on wavebands from 1.164 gigahertz to 1.575 gigahertz. These fall squarely within the R330ZH's catchment area. Official documents seen by the author state that the system has a jamming range of up to 30 kilometers. That's quite a distance. And then it talks about how the US has tried to proof the JDAM against certain electronic warfare capabilities. It seems like they tried to proof it against spoofing, which would send it a false GPS coordinate and guide it to that position rather than the position it was originally aimed at. But if you're just blocking the GPS signal altogether, it's going to just plain miss its target. That's basically what it says. And then the Rusi piece ends by saying the US global navigation satellite system engineers may have to rethink how to safeguard JDAMs for the wars of tomorrow based on the conflicts of today. There's no talk about how to fix this now. There really is no way for them to fix it now. This is a research and development project that will probably take a year, several years to lay out and achieve any sort of result. And this is the same problem the US has had with all of its other GPS-guided weapons that Russia has been jamming. There is no solution. In Ukraine, in many instances, just simply stops using these capabilities, which then places more demand on conventional artillery. And of course, electronic warfare capabilities isn't the only way Russia can deal with JDAMs and other Western-provided precision-guided weapons. They can also just intercept them with their air defense systems. So they were able to intercept HIMARS, JDAM bombs, and drones over the course of a 24-hour period with its various air defense systems. So the BBC talks about how Ukraine might possibly think about countering Russian glide bombs. And it says, so what can be done to counter glide bombs? Professor Bronk says that intercepting the bombs mid-flight is not a viable solution because of the sheer number the Russians have at their disposal. You would blow through all the available air defense ammunition too quickly, he says. That this is what I have pointed out many times. There's simply too many long-range weapons of all kinds that Russia produces for Ukraine to intercept them with air defense systems. It never had enough on hand to do this, and the collective West doesn't produce enough annually and never will to be able to do this. So it just simply cannot be done. What else could be done? It also says the only solution, bar a ground incursion, is to target the planes that drop them either in flight or on the ground, but that comes with significant risks. The US Patriot surface-to-air missile launcher system can shoot the fighter bombers down, but only if it's positioned near the front lines. This carries the risk of being spotted by Russian drones and hit with ballistic missiles. Professor Bronk says something that happened to 2 launchers earlier this year. We remember that. There was a video of that. This leaves the option of using long-range missiles or drones to target Russian air bases. In April, Kiev claimed to have used a barrage of drones to destroy at least 6 military aircraft and badly damage 8 others at an airfield in Russia's southern Rostov region. This solution, however, is not without its problems. The US, the biggest provider of Ukrainian military aid, prohibits Kiev from using any of its weapon systems on internationally recognized Russian territory. While this does not include Crimea or occupied Ukraine, it does mean that airfields inside Russia are off limits. But even in Crimea, where Ukraine has attempted to target Russian warplanes, and it has targeted and destroyed all kinds of Russian equipment, just not on any scale that makes any difference at all. Russia is still able to use Crimea as a base of operations. And if that's the case for Crimea, how would it be any different across the rest of Russia, which is quite vast? They simply don't have enough missiles, drones, other long-range capabilities to target and destroy all of Russia's military aviation on the ground. They have tried. They don't have it. I don't think that is a viable solution. And that's essentially what the BBC article is saying. There is no viable solution. As my article suggests, Ukraine will just continue to be buried in Russian steel, be it artillery or glide bombs. Now, let's get back to my article. That was quite a tangent. Let's get back to my article from New Eastern Outlook. Beyond US-made JDAMs failing to hit their mark, a number of other precision-guided weapons transferred to Ukraine have also faced Russian EW jamming, including US-made Excalibur 155mm GPS-guided artillery shells, the guided multiple-launch rocket system Gimlers fired by likewise US-made HIMARS and M270 launchers, and the US-made ground-launched small-diameter bombs, which are also launched by HIMARS and the M270 system. While these weapons have been employed successfully on the battlefield, their overall effectiveness has been hindered by Russian EW capabilities because they are also provided in smaller quantities than the equivalent Russian munitions. This creates a decisive advantage for Russia. Other game-changing weapons that have been exposed throughout the fighting in Ukraine includes German-made Leopard 1 and 2 main battle tanks, the British-made Challenger 2 main battle tank, both of which were used amid Ukraine's failed 2023 offensive. We remember seeing images and videos of them burning in Ukraine on the battlefield. Also transferred to Ukraine were American-made M1 Abrams. They were held back during the 2023 offensive and instead made their battlefield debut during fighting in Avdiivka this year, amid which Russian forces prevailed. Images and footage of M1 Abrams burning on the battlefield demonstrated that they were no exception to the outcome of other Western main battle tanks in Ukraine. Here is the CNN article right here. Soldiers in Ukraine say U.S. supplied tanks have made them targets for Russian strikes. That is not a very promising start to this article, and I assure you it only gets worse as you read through it. CNN, in a recent article, interviewed Ukrainian crews attempting to use the M1 Abrams, reporting their frustration and disappointment. Titled, Soldiers in Ukraine say U.S. supplied tanks have made them targets for Russian strikes, admits crews trained in Germany said the vehicles, the U.S. military's main $10 million battle tank used in Iraq against Saddam Hussein's forces and insurgents, lacked armor that could not stop modern weapons. Isn't that exactly what I said would happen before the first Abrams rolled into Ukraine? Its armor is not sufficient for this moment, said one crew member, call sign Joker. It doesn't protect the crew. For real, today, this is the war of drones. So now, when the tank rolls out, they always try to hit them. This contradicts claims made by Western analysts and commentators praising the survivability of Western armored vehicles. We hear that all the time. Yes, it was destroyed, but the crew survived. According to these Ukrainian crew members, they don't. They get maimed and killed all the time, and that is a huge problem. The article also discusses the logistical and maintenance challenges of the tank, rendering many of those remaining inoperable, which I also said was going to happen. The article admits they appear to have technical issues too. One parked under a tree was almost immobile during CNN's visit due to an engine problem. The crew say, despite the vehicle having just been shipped in from Poland, they also complain about how in rain or fog, condensation can fry the electronics inside the vehicle. And I talked about how the M1 Abrams uses a turbine engine. It's temperamental. Maybe that's even an understatement. It's highly temperamental. It requires huge numbers of maintenance hours versus operational hours, and it requires very specialized maintenance teams to maintain, keep it operating, which I don't think that Ukraine has in sufficient numbers. And when they break down, they often have to go back to Poland to be repaired, which is 1,000 kilometers from the front line. CNN also reported that the ammunition provided to Ukrainian M1 Abrams crews was meant for tank-on-tank warfare, which the article admits is a rarity. The tanks are instead used as assault guns to fire on infantry positions, meaning that a high-explosive round would be more appropriate, but apparently were not provided in sufficient numbers. Finally, CNN admits that the failure of US-made M1 Abrams tanks may also be owed to the fact that Ukraine is expected to use them in a manner the US and NATO never intended, without sufficient artillery and air support. CNN notes, the Ukrainian crew expressed frustration the tanks were made for a NATO style of warfare in which air power and artillery prepare the battlefield before tanks and infantry advance. Kiev has long bemoaned its lack of artillery and air power. Again, two things that the West is simply incapable of providing Ukraine. Ukraine has neither, making all of the complex, heavy, unreliable Western tanks transferred to Ukrainian forces particularly vulnerable, including US-made M1 Abrams. This was all entirely predictable. And that is what I discuss next in my article. Contrary to many Western headlines heralding the transfer of Western weapons to Ukraine, anticipating game-changing outcomes, the failure of US-European hardware was entirely predictable. The myth of Western military superiority was based entirely on a series of mismatches spanning multiple conflicts over the course of several decades, where the US and its allies waged war on nations with poorly trained, poorly equipped forces. While many of these nations were supposedly operating Soviet or Russian military equipment, it was multiple generations behind the state-of-the-art and operated by poorly organized units unable to use the equipment to its full potential. Even with these many disadvantages, nations targeted by US wars of aggression over the decades did demonstrate that, at least in theory, US and European weapons had limitations and would be vulnerable in battle against peer and near-peer adversaries. Because of this, and other factors, including challenges regarding training and logistics, the effectiveness or lack thereof of Western weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine was predictable. The myth of Western military superiority has now been fully shattered in Ukraine, where Western weapons are turning out to suffer both quantitative and qualitative limitations, giving Russian forces the decisive advantage on the battlefield, and an advantage the West is incapable of seizing upon for itself. The aforementioned Sky News article discussing the vast and multiplying number of Russian glide bombs also noted shortages of Western-provided weapons owed to insufficient military industrial production across the West. The article includes a section titled "Factories Could Win the War on Front Lines," admitting the importance of producing weapons and ammunition is why many experts say factory production lines, rather than the front line, could be where the war in Ukraine is won. And again, this is something that I've been saying for the past 2 years plus now. This reflects the adage, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. The article explains that Western arms manufacturers only expand production capacity when sufficient orders are placed. This maximizes profit, but at the expense of readiness. Expanding production is a costly process requiring resources and, more critically, time. Russia's state-owned arms manufacturing enterprises prioritize readiness and maintain excessive capacity regardless of orders, meaning that it's capable of ramping up production in a relatively short period of time measured in months versus Western factories, which require a year or more. It is clear that Ukraine's current crisis is a result, at least in part, of Russia's long-term focus on military-industrial production and logistics years before this SMO was launched, versus a collective West whose proxy war is being fought with weapons and a military-industrial base never meant to operate on this scale, at this intensity, and for this long. If and when the collective West makes serious efforts to expand military-industrial production, Russia is already working from a multi-year head start. Collective US-European artillery shell production, for example, is projected to expand to between 2.5 and 3 million shells a year between 2025 and 2027. This is still less than Russia produces currently. By 2025-2027, Russia will almost certainly have expanded production even further. Ultimately, Ukraine's victory amid this conflict was never a genuine objective among policymakers in Washington, London, and Brussels, as admitted in the 2019 Rand Corporation's paper, this one here that I cite very often, almost every video now, extending Russia, competing from advantageous ground. I cite it almost every video now because in 2019, long before the special military operation was launched by Russia, it admitted it was trying to provoke, the US was trying to provoke a war in Ukraine with Russia. They were trying to draw Russia in, and they admitted that yes, it could overextend Russia. It could precipitate some sort of Soviet-style collapse, but it will come at the expense of Ukraine's defeat. It will be destroyed in this conflict. That is what it says in the paper. Now we see this running its full course right now. We see it. This paper, written in 2019, has now been fully realized. The plan always was to provoke a costly Russian intervention in Ukraine to overstretch Russia and possibly precipitate a Soviet Union-style collapse. The conflict for Ukraine, the report predicted, could produce disproportionately large Ukrainian casualties, which it is, territorial losses, which it has and continues to do, and refugee flows. Almost certainly that is what has been happening, and it might even lead to Ukraine. It might even lead Ukraine into a disadvantageous peace, which is almost inevitable. Today, we see what the aftermath of Washington's proxy war with Russia and Ukraine is. An Eastern European nation once balancing itself between East and West, benefiting from doing business with both worlds, being buried by Russian steel for the benefit of allies who are unable and also unwilling to genuinely assist Ukraine. Most of the rhetoric coming out of the collective West is designed to encourage Ukraine to irrationally fight on, despite the obvious outcome of the fighting, an outcome well known even as early as 2019. While a deep hatred has been deliberately bred in the hearts and minds of many Ukrainians against Russia, their real enemy has always been the leadership of the collective West. The short-sighted nature of Western policymaking, predicated on the perpetual but ultimately unsustainable procurement of profits, power, and influence, makes the collective West its own worst enemy. Only time will tell just how far this self-destructive process continues before wiser counsel prevails, a more appropriate Western foreign policy adopted, and Ukraine finally sits at the negotiation table to end a war it not only can't win and was never expected to win in the first place, but one the longer it fights, the less Ukraine there ultimately will be if its conclusion of the war is allowed to be decided entirely on the battlefield. In the meantime, Russian military-industrial production only continues to grow. Artillery shells, armor, air power, glide bombs, drones, air defenses, and missiles of all kinds not only continue to be produced in greater quantities, but are also being developed toward greater quality. In many instances, Russian military hardware exceeds the capabilities of its Western counterparts because there is simply more of it. Regardless of quality, it can simply bury adversaries on the battlefield with steel. And that concludes the article. And I hope you can see the full arc of Western foreign policy in Ukraine. I hope you can now clearly see it was always meant to follow this arc, and it is following this arc. It is the destruction of Ukraine and the West trying to maximize the price for Russia at the cost of Ukraine's existence. And when you have allies like this, you really don't need enemies. And you can see when Russia takes territory, say Mariupol, for instance, it proceeds to rebuild it and protect it. And this is happening while on the other side of the line of contact, the West is doing everything in its power to push all of Ukraine into this fire of proxy war that it itself lit. I will continue keeping an eye on this conflict in Ukraine, as well as the other conflicts and interventions the US and its allies are involved in all around the globe. We have to remember, this is not just about Ukraine and a proxy war with Russia. This is part of a much wider global foreign policy objective of the United States. It wants to eliminate all peer and near-peer competitors. That includes Russia, but it also involves China. And so they're doing the exact same thing in the Asia-Pacific region. They're trying to create a conflict like we see in Ukraine and its impact on Europe. They're trying to do the same thing in Asia-Pacific through the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, also the Chinese island province of Taiwan, which the US has politically captured. They're trying to use these fronts to precipitate a war that isn't just going to consume the countries involved, it's going to disrupt the entire region. And in many ways, whether the US wins or loses, it really doesn't matter as long as everyone is being driven into the ground. That benefits the US. The US cannot rise up ahead of these countries as they are growing. So it wants to knock them all down and be the last one standing. But this is a policy of desperation, of immense global instability and destruction, but it is clearly the foreign policy that the West is pursuing. So we have to keep an eye on all of this. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I particularly suggest you get on Telegram. I post absolutely everything there, including full backups of all of my videos, all of my articles, even this article from New Eastern Outlook, which is censored. The link is censored on X. I post a link to it in Telegram. You can find it there, so please follow me on Telegram. Check the video description for all of the links that I reference, including the link to this article itself, which will be pinned at the top of the comment section. There are also ways in the video description where you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my other social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip past them. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or even if you have no extra resources and you're helping share my work with others, all of that is greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.